Nobody touch him. Stay back!
The old man collapsed. In the middle of the crowded diner, his heart gave out. The paramedics were minutes away, an eternity. But the black waitress, the one the manager always called slow, was already on the floor beside him. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a disgraced cardiologist. And she was about to perform a miracle on the linoleum floor, not knowing she was saving the man who had destroyed her career. To the stressed-out, overworked staff of the Gray Street Diner, she was just a part of the morning rush. Amara, a 42-year-old black woman with quiet, observant eyes and a way of moving that was both efficient and weary. She worked the counter and the back booths, her world a constant, chaotic symphony of clattering plates, shouting short-order cooks, and the low, incessant hum of the coffee machine. Her manager, a man named Henderson, saw her as a problem. He was a petty man with a thin mustache and a constant sheen of sweat on his upper lip, and he took a particular, cruel pleasure in picking on Amara. "Vance, you've got 3 orders up. Are you sleeping back there?" He'd bark, even when she was the only one keeping up. A little less moping, a little more moving. He never called her by her first name, only Vance. A hard, dismissive sound. The staff and the regulars saw a quiet, long-suffering waitress, a woman who endured the manager's tirades with a frustrating, unbreakable calm. They never suspected they were looking at Dr. Amara Vance, a woman who had once been one of the country's most promising cardiologists. A woman whose hands, now used to carrying plates of greasy eggs, had once performed groundbreaking surgical procedures. A woman whose career had been spectacularly destroyed after a fatal equipment malfunction in her operating room. The powerful medical device corporation had needed a scapegoat, and she, the brilliant black woman who had dared to question their device's safety before the incident, had been the perfect target. They had buried her under a mountain of lawsuits and media slander, and she had disappeared, taking a quiet, anonymous job in a 24-hour diner to pay off her debts and piece together the shattered remains of her life. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning, a day like any other, gray and damp with city rain. The diner was packed. Amara was in the weeds, juggling 6 tables, when an old man walked in. He was in his late 70s, dressed in a simple, well-worn coat, and he moved with the slow, careful gait of someone for whom every step was a negotiation. He didn't look like he had much money, and he sat alone in a small booth at the back, Amara's section. Henderson sneered as he walked past her. "Looks like you got another winner, Vance," he muttered. "Try to turn that table over before he takes root and dies there." Amara ignored him. She approached the old man with a pot of fresh coffee and a small, genuine smile. "Good morning, sir," she said. "Coffee." The old man looked up, and his eyes were surprisingly sharp, a bright, intelligent blue that seemed to take in everything. "Please," he said, his voice a quiet rumble. "And thank you." For the next hour, he just sat there, nursing his coffee and watching the chaotic ballet of the diner. He didn't order any food. He just watched. Henderson grew increasingly agitated, but Amara continued to treat the old man with a quiet, patient kindness. She refilled his cup without being asked, brought him a glass of water, and never once tried to rush him. She had seen 1,000 lonely people in her life, in both hospitals and diners, and she knew that sometimes all a person needed was a safe, warm place to sit for a while. The incident happened at exactly 10:17 a.m. One moment, the old man was taking a slow sip of his coffee. The next, he let out a short, sharp gasp. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. His hands flew to his chest, his face contorting in a mask of sudden, agonizing pain. He slumped sideways in the booth and then slid, unconscious, to the floor. The diner erupted. A woman at the next table screamed. Someone else shouted, "Call 911." Henderson, his face pale with panic, rushed over. "What happened?" he yelled, as if Amara had done it on purpose. "Don't touch him. Nobody touch him." He was frozen, a man completely overwhelmed, his petty tyranny instantly dissolving into useless, flapping panic. But Amara was not panicking. The moment the cup had shattered, a switch had flipped in her mind. The waitress, with her exhaustion and her worries, disappeared. The doctor, the one who had been trained to run towards the chaos, not away from it, took over. "He's in cardiac arrest," she said, her voice cutting through the noise with a quiet, absolute authority that made everyone freeze. She was already on the floor beside the man, her fingers finding the pulse point on his neck. There's no pulse. Someone call 911 and tell them we have a V-fib arrest and we are starting CPR. I need space. Now. She looked at Henderson, who was still sputtering. You, she commanded, her voice like steel. Keep people back. And stop shouting. You're not helping. Without waiting for a response, she turned her full attention to the dying man on the floor. The paramedics were at least 5 minutes away in the city traffic. He didn't have 5 minutes. His brain was being starved of oxygen. She knew, with a certainty that was both a blessing and a curse, that she was his only chance. And she knew that in doing this, she was about to reveal the ghost she had tried so hard to bury. In the chaotic, adrenaline-charged atmosphere of the diner, time seemed to slow down and warp. The screams of the patrons, the frantic, useless shouting of Henderson, the distant wail of a siren, it all faded into a dull, background hum for Amara. Her world contracted to the space on the grimy linoleum floor, to the still, silent man in the worn coat, whose life was now measured in seconds. Her training, buried for a decade under a mountain of grief and regret, came rushing back with a clarity that was both terrifying and strangely calming. She saw not an old man on a diner floor, but a patient on an operating table. She saw not a chaotic emergency, but a complex, time-sensitive equation that she, and only she, knew how to solve. I need his airway cleared, she commanded to a young busboy who was standing nearby, frozen in shock. Tilt his head back, gently. That's it. She positioned herself beside the man's chest, her mind a blur of precise, instantaneous calculations. She knew that standard CPR, while better than nothing, was often not enough in a full V-fib arrest. His heart wasn't just stopped, it was quivering, a chaotic, useless flutter. It needed a shock to reset its rhythm, and she had no defibrillator. But she had her hands, and she had a deep, almost forgotten knowledge of the heart's electrical pathways. She remembered a risky, controversial technique she had once theorized about with her mentor in medical school, a specialized, high-impact form of CPR designed to manually shock the heart back into rhythm. It was dangerous, with a low chance of success, but the alternative was certain death. She placed the heel of one hand on the center of the man's chest, her other hand laced over the top. She locked her elbows, positioning her shoulders directly over her hands. And then, she began. This was not the rhythmic, almost gentle motion of standard CPR. This was a series of sharp, powerful, perfectly timed compressions, each one delivered with a force and a precision that was breathtaking to watch. She was not just pushing on his chest, she was striking it, using the force of the blow to try and create a small, desperate electrical jolt. Her movements were a blur of controlled, violent grace. The tremor in her hands, the one Henderson had so often mocked, was gone, replaced by the steady, unshakable strength of a surgeon. What is she doing? Someone whispered from the crowd that Henderson was failing to keep back. She's going to break his ribs. She's saving his life. Another voice, a young woman in nursing scrubs who had been at the counter, replied with a quiet awe. That's a precordial thump. They don't even teach that anymore. It's perfect. Amara was oblivious to them. She was in the zone, a place of pure, focused action. She was counting, not just the compressions, but the seconds, the milliseconds. She was listening, not with her ears, but with her hands, feeling for the slightest response from the still heart beneath her palms. For 3 long minutes, there was nothing. The man was gone. The siren was getting closer, but she knew it would be too late. Come on, she whispered to the still face of the old man, her own sweat now dripping onto his worn coat. Don't you quit on me. Not today. She repositioned her hands, adjusted the angle of her thrust, and delivered one final, powerful compression. And then, she felt it. A flicker. A single, weak, but distinct beat under her hand. A flutter of an eyelid. A shallow, ragged gasp of air. A murmur went through the crowd. He's breathing, the young nurse cried out. My God, she did it. At that exact moment, the paramedics burst through the door, their arrival a whirlwind of equipment and official action. They rushed to the scene, ready to take over. Ma'am, you need to step back, the lead paramedic said, gently trying to move Amara aside. But Amara did not move. He's in sinus rhythm, but it's weak, she reported, her voice the calm, clipped tone of a doctor giving a handover. I administered a pre-cordial thump to revert a V-fib arrest approximately 30 seconds ago. He's still unstable. You need to get him on a monitor and push 1 milligram of epinephrine now. The paramedic, a man who was used to being the highest medical authority at any scene, stared at her, stunned into silence by the precision of her report. He looked from her faded waitress uniform to the still fragile but undeniably alive man on the floor. He didn't question her. He simply nodded and relayed her orders to his team. As they loaded the old man onto a gurney, his sharp, intelligent blue eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy with confusion, but they found Amara's. He tried to speak, but the paramedics were already moving him towards the door. His gaze, however, remained locked on her, a silent, profound question in his eyes. The moment the ambulance doors closed, the adrenaline that had been coursing through Amara's veins vanished, leaving her weak and trembling. The tremor in her hands returned, worse than before. She leaned against the counter, the full weight of what she had just done crashing down on her. She hadn't just saved a life. She had resurrected a ghost. The ghost of Dr. Amara Vance. And she knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating, that her quiet, invisible life in the diner was over. Henderson, who had been a useless, panicked bystander just minutes before, now saw an opportunity to reclaim his authority. "Well," he said loudly to the stunned patrons and staff, "it seems my staff is even better trained than I thought. A little bonus for you in your next paycheck, Vance. Now, someone clean up this broken cup." He had not seen a doctor. He had not seen a hero. He had only seen a waitress who had stepped out of line, and he was already trying to put her back in her place. The hours after the ambulance left were a blur of muted chaos. The police came and took statements. Henderson, in a masterful performance of managerial concern, recounted a heavily edited version of events where his quick-thinking staff, trained in emergency protocols, had saved the day. He never once mentioned Amara's specific, heroic actions, reducing her life-saving intervention to a mere footnote. Amara, for her part, gave a simple, factual statement to the police, identifying herself only as a waitress and omitting any detail that might hint at her medical past. The ghost, having made its brief, stunning appearance, had retreated back into the shadows. By late afternoon, the diner had returned to its normal, noisy rhythm, the morning's life-or-death drama already fading into just another piece of city lore. But for Amara, something had irrevocably shifted. The wall she had so carefully built between her past and present had been breached. The feel of the old man's heart restarting under her hands, the familiar, adrenaline-fueled clarity of a medical crisis. It had awakened a part of herself she had tried to kill for 10 years. As she wiped down the counter, her hands still ached with the memory of the compressions, a phantom echo of a life she had once commanded. Meanwhile, across town at the city's most exclusive private hospital, the old man in the tweed coat was causing a stir of a different kind. He was not, it turned out, a lonely pensioner. He was Arthur Sterling, the reclusive, multi-billionaire founder and chairman of Sterling Medical, the largest and most powerful medical device corporation in the world. His arrival in the ER, with a story about being saved by an anonymous waitress, sent a wave of panic through the hospital's administration. Sterling, weak but lucid, was a man accustomed to answers. He remembered the chaos, the fear, and then the calm, authoritative face of the black waitress leaning over him. He remembered the impossible strength in her hands. He had built his empire on identifying and acquiring genius, and he knew, with an instinct that had never failed him, that he had not been saved by a lucky amateur. He had been saved by a master. "Find her," he commanded his personal assistant, a sharp, impeccably dressed young woman named Ms. Chun. "I want to know everything about her. Her name, her history. Find the waitress who saved my life." Ms. Chun was ruthlessly efficient. Within a few hours, she had a name, Amara Vance. But as she began to dig deeper, she hit a series of strange, frustrating dead ends. For the last 10 years, Amara Vance's life was a simple, unremarkable record of low-wage jobs and rented apartments. But before that, it was as if she didn't exist. There were no college records, no professional licenses, no social security history beyond a certain date. It was a life that seemed to have been created out of thin air. The breakthrough came from an old, retired journalist who had once covered the medical technology beat. When Ms. Chun mentioned the name Amara Vance and her impossible medical skill, the journalist's memory was sparked. Vance. He mused over the phone. That name. There was a scandal, maybe 10, 12 years ago. A brilliant young cardiologist at St. Michael's. A real rising star. She was the scapegoat in that sterling defib 5000 malfunction case. Ms. Chun felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The sterling defib 5000 was the darkest chapter in her employer's history. A state-of-the-art defibrillator that had a catastrophic, unforeseen flaw, leading to the deaths of several patients. The company had weathered the scandal by pinning the blame on physician error. The doctor, the journalist continued. They said she used the device incorrectly. Ruined her career. I remember her name now. It was Dr. Amara Vance. In the penthouse suite of the hospital, Ms. Chun delivered the news to her boss. She laid out the files, the old news clippings, the court documents. She told him the story of the brilliant young doctor whose career his company had systematically and ruthlessly destroyed to protect its own stock price. Arthur Sterling listened in a profound, heavy silence. The irony was so staggering, so cosmically cruel, that it was almost unbelievable. The woman who had saved his life, with nothing but her own 2 hands and a deep, intuitive knowledge of the heart, was the same woman whose life his own company had shattered. The ghost he had created had come back not to haunt him, but to save him. He looked at the files, at the picture of the younger, brighter Dr. Amara Vance, and he felt a shame so deep it was a physical weight on his chest. He had built an empire on the promise of saving lives, but his success was built on the foundation of a lie that had destroyed an innocent one. Get her on the phone, he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. Tell her Arthur Sterling would like to thank her in person. Back at the diner, Amara was in the middle of her evening shift when Henderson called her to the phone by the kitchen. It's for you, he said, his tone a mixture of annoyance and a new, grudging curiosity. Some fancy lady. Says she's calling on behalf of the old guy from this morning. Amara took the phone, her heart beginning to pound. Ms. Vance? A polite, professional voice said on the other end. My name is Ms. Chun. I am the personal assistant to Mr. Arthur Sterling. He would be deeply grateful if you would be willing to meet with him at the hospital tomorrow. The name hit Amara like a physical blow. Arthur Sterling. Sterling Medical. The man, the company, that had been the source of her 10-year nightmare. She felt the floor drop out from under her. It wasn't a random old man she had saved. It was the architect of her ruin. The king of the very kingdom she had been exiled from. Ms. Vance. Ms. Chun asked, her voice concerned by the long silence. Are you still there? Amara took a deep, steadying breath, the old, familiar calm of the doctor taking over once again. Yes, she said, her voice quiet but clear as glass. I'm here. Tell Mr. Sterling I will be there. The next morning, Amara stood before the towering glass facade of the Sterling Wing at St. Jude's Hospital, a building her own professional ruin had likely helped to fund. She wore a simple, dark dress she had bought from a second-hand store, an armor of quiet dignity for the battle she was about to face. She was not there as a waitress or a supplicant. She was there as Dr. Amara Vance, a woman with a ghost to confront. The penthouse hospital suite was a world of hushed luxury, with panoramic views of the city and the quiet, deferential movements of a private nursing staff. Arthur Sterling was sitting up in a large, comfortable chair by the window, a plush robe covering his hospital gown. He looked older, more fragile than he had in the diner, but his intelligent blue eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Ms. Chun stood discreetly in the corner. Ms. Vance, Sterling began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, heavy with the weight of unspoken history. Thank you for coming. I understand I owe you my life. You owe me nothing, Mr. Sterling, Amara replied, her voice calm and even. I did what anyone with my training would have done. Ah, yes, he said, a pained look crossing his face. Your training. I have been reviewing the events of 10 years ago, the Sterling defib 5000 incident. My company's official report. You mean the report that blamed a phantom power surge and a panicked, inexperienced physician for a device malfunction that your own internal engineers had already flagged as a critical design flaw? Amara's voice was not angry, but cold and precise. each word a carefully placed scalpel. Sterling flinched. The directness of her accusation, the sheer, unadorned truth of it, left no room for the usual corporate evasions. "I was not the CEO at the time," he said, the excuse sounding weak even to his own ears. "I was chairman of the board. I was told the matter was being handled by our legal and PR departments." "You were told a story that was convenient for your stock price," Amara corrected him. "And to make that story believable, you needed a villain. You needed someone to blame. And you chose me. You didn't just fire me. You orchestrated a systematic campaign to destroy my reputation, to ensure I would never work in medicine again. You turned my name into a cautionary tale." She took a step closer to his chair. "Do you have any idea what that is like, Mr. Sterling? To have the one thing you love, the one thing you are truly great at, stolen from you? To go from saving lives to serving coffee? To know that every day you possess a skill that could be helping people, but you are forced to let it atrophy because a group of powerful men decided you were a threat to their bottom line?" The questions were not a plea for pity. They were an indictment. Sterling, a man who had never been on the receiving end of such a raw, honest accounting, had no defense. He simply sat there, the powerful billionaire, utterly silenced by the quiet, irrefutable testimony of the woman his company had tried to erase. "I know," he said finally, his voice hoarse, "that no apology can undo the damage we have done to you. But I must offer it anyway, on behalf of my company and for myself. I am profoundly sorry." He looked at Ms. Chun, who stepped forward and placed a slim, elegant leather portfolio on the table between them. "That is a settlement offer," Sterling explained. "It contains a sum of money that is substantial, enough for you to never have to work another day in your life. It is also a full, public retraction of the company's findings from 10 years ago and an offer to fund the complete restoration of your medical license." It was everything she had once dreamed of: vindication, security, a return to the life she had lost. 10 years ago, she would have wept with gratitude. But Amara did not even glance at the portfolio. "I don't want your money, Mr. Sterling," she said quietly. Sterling stared at her, genuinely bewildered. In his world, every problem, every injustice, could be solved with a sufficiently large check. "I don't understand," he said. "You think this was just about me?" Amara asked, a new, fierce fire in her eyes. "The Sterling defib 5,000. How many of them are still in hospitals, in ambulances, around the world?" Sterling's face went pale. "The device was recalled," he began. "It was a voluntary recall of a single batch," Amara cut in, her voice sharp with the authority of a doctor who knew her facts. "You never admitted the core design was flawed. You just blamed a manufacturing error, which means there are thousands of them still in service. Thousands of ticking time bombs, waiting for the next unfortunate malfunction, waiting to create the next scapegoat." She leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. "I don't want a payout that allows you and your company to bury your mistake for good. I want a reckoning. I want a full, mandatory recall of every Sterling defib 5,000 still in circulation. I want a public admission of the original design flaw. And I want you to establish a fund, not for me, but for the families of the patients who died, the ones whose deaths were blamed on physician error when they were, in fact, the fault of your company's greed." She stood up straight, her full height seeming to fill the room. "You want to thank me for saving your life, Mr. Sterling? Then help me make sure that no other lives are lost because of the lies you told to save your company. That is my price, and it is not negotiable." Amara's ultimatum hung in the air of the luxurious hospital suite, more powerful and absolute than any corporate negotiation Arthur Sterling had ever faced. He was a man who had spent his life navigating a world of contracts, loopholes, and financial settlements. But he was now faced with a demand that could not be bought or negotiated. It was a demand for something he had long forgotten: moral accountability. He looked at the quiet, resolute woman before him. He saw not the waitress from the diner, nor the disgraced doctor from the files. He saw a figure of immense moral clarity, a woman who had been through the crucible of injustice and had emerged not with a desire for revenge, but with a fierce, unwavering commitment to the truth. She was offering him something far more valuable than a quiet settlement. She was offering him a chance at redemption. "You are right," Sterling said finally, his voice a low, gravelly rumble of defeat and dawning resolve. "A retraction and a check. It's just more silence, isn't it? A way to bury the past. You are asking for something much more difficult. You are asking for a reckoning. He met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw not the billionaire or the patient, but the man he might have been. All right, Dr. Vance, he said, the title now carrying its full, earned weight. You will have your reckoning. We will do it your way. The days that followed were a whirlwind of controlled, seismic activity. Arthur Sterling, with the full force of his immense wealth and power, now turned his formidable arsenal against his own company. Guided by Amara, who provided the names, dates, and technical details from the original scandal, he bypassed his own board of directors and launched an independent, internal investigation that was both swift and brutal. He brought in a team of outside lawyers, not to protect the company, but to expose it. They uncovered the truth that had been buried for a decade. The memos from the engineer's warning of the defibrillator's flaw, the minutes from the board meetings where the decision was made to cover it up, the systematic campaign to destroy the career of the one doctor who had tried to sound the alarm. The corrupt executives who were still with the company, men who had felt safe and secure in their power for years, were summarily fired. The legal team that had orchestrated the cover-up was dismissed. Sterling was cleaning his own house, and he was doing it with a ruthlessness that terrified the very people who had once profited from his power. The final act was a press conference held not in a sterile corporate boardroom, but in a simple university auditorium. Arthur Sterling, looking frail but resolute, stood at the podium. Beside him, in a simple, dark dress, stood Dr. Amara Vance. He did not make excuses. He did not deflect blame. He told the world the truth. He told them about the flawed device, about the cover-up, about the innocent patients who had died. And then, he told them the story of Dr. Vance, the brilliant, courageous doctor his company had tried to silence. Sterling Medical was built on a foundation of saving lives, he said, his voice echoing in the silent auditorium. But somewhere along the way, we began to value our stock price more than our principles. We betrayed our mission. And in the process, we destroyed the career of a true hero. Today that ends. He announced a full, mandatory, global recall of every Sterling Defib 5000 still in service. He announced the creation of a massive, multi-billion-dollar compensation fund for the families of the victims. And then, he made an announcement that shocked the entire industry. I am stepping down as chairman of Sterling Medical, he said. And in my place, I have asked the board to approve the creation of a new, independent medical ethics and patient safety oversight board. This board will have the power to veto any product launch, to investigate any safety concern, and to hold the company accountable to its original mission. And I am honored to announce that its first chair will be Dr. Amara Vance. Amara stepped up to the microphone. She did not speak of her own suffering. She did not speak of revenge. She spoke of the future. She spoke of a new model of corporate responsibility, one where patient safety was not a line item in a budget, but the very moral foundation of the business. She spoke of creating a culture where a young, idealistic doctor could raise a concern without fearing for their career. Her quiet, powerful words were a testament to the long, difficult journey she had traveled. She was no longer a waitress hiding from her past in a greasy spoon diner. She was not even the brilliant doctor whose career had been stolen. She was something more. She was a leader, a woman who had taken her own profound personal tragedy and transformed it into a force for universal good. In the years that followed, under Dr. Vance's unyielding guidance, Sterling Medical was transformed. It became a model of ethical practice and patient advocacy. The Amara Vance protocols for whistleblower protection became the industry standard. Amara never returned to surgery. Her new role was more important. She spent her days in boardrooms and research labs, not as a practitioner, but as a guardian, a quiet, powerful voice for the one person who so often gets lost in the business of medicine, the patient. Arthur Sterling, having given away the bulk of his fortune to the compensation fund and the new foundation, retired from public life. He and Amara became unlikely friends, their bond forged in the crucible of a shared, near-death experience and a mutual respect. He would often visit her, not in her new, impressive office, but at the Grace Street diner, where she still went for coffee every Tuesday morning. One morning, sitting in the same back booth where he had almost died, he watched as she spoke with a young waitress, offering a quiet word of encouragement. "You know," he said, a small, genuine smile on his face. "Of all the things I've seen you do, from restarting my heart to taking down my entire company, that is the most impressive." "What?" Amara asked, turning back to him. "The way you see people," he said. "Really see them. It's the one thing I never learned how to do until you saved my life." Amara smiled, the quiet, gentle smile of a woman who was finally at peace. "It's simple, Arthur," she said. "You just have to remember that every person, no matter who they are, has a heartbeat. And every heartbeat is worth listening to." How many of our institutions have lost their way, valuing profit over people? And what could be healed, what could be saved, if we had the courage to listen to the quiet, steady heartbeat of the truth, no matter where we find it? If this story about courage, integrity, and second chances moved you, please like, subscribe, and share. You never know whose quiet voice might be waiting to change the world.